Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On this episode, I'm going to be talking about Darkstar's Sinner, Sacrifice for Redemption, which I'd helpfully received review code courtesy of another indie. For those not in the know, Sinner is a challenging boss battler with a Souls-like feel, albeit with some distinctly vicious twists in its formula. But is Sinner a guilty pleasure, or will it leave you in need of salvation? Story time! Well, the basic premise of the game is vague enough, given that it can essentially be summed up as ruin has befallen this kingdom, and you've been reborn and you're a sinner? Fix this? Maybe befalling might be more appropriate given the implication of ongoing meteoric catastrophe, but anywho, the story past that is a bit more cryptic, as each of the bosses has a chunk of introductory text and a cutscene, the latter being for when you first encounter them. These slices of story provide insight into the people you're fighting and how they embody each of the deadly sins. But they also serve to provide a small bit of understanding about the main character themselves. There's also an NPC that you can optionally encounter after a certain boss fight, and which provides a few more details about the story and how to get the true ending. With all that said, while there wasn't an excess of lore to delve into for Sinner, what was there was enjoyable enough to parse together, though I do wish there was a way to rewatch the introductory boss cutscenes without diving into the system files. Now, the gameplay is where the meat of the experience in Sinner rests, and it's deceptively straightforward. For those who've dived into the Souls-like genre before, the game will likely control in a familiar enough fashion, which is to say learning how to dodge at the right moment to getting close to a boss, or how to parry, will likely end up being paramount to your continued survival and, your strategy, especially given that you're at the mercy of relatively low health and healing items which hinder your movement while using them. And don't expect to be able to have the option of grinding it any higher. This isn't an RPG, so you won't be beating experience out of your adversaries. But then it really isn't all that long before you get to meet all of them. See, upon starting the game up, you're tossed into a fairly small and delightfully quick tutorial area, which is also optional. And once you've completed or bypassed this area, the game introduces you to the hub, where 7 stones rest. Each one of these stones corresponds to a boss, whom you need to eliminate in order to reach the final battle. And this is where the deceptive part of that simplicity kicks in, because whilst each boss is easily in reach, you can only confront them once you've made a sacrifice, which means you take on a boss-specific debuff which permanently hinders you for the rest of your playthrough, ranging from such wonderful options as reducing your healing, less health and stamina, less attack power, and other wonderful options to choose from. And, yes, you do technically have the option of retrieving a sacrifice to shed a debuff you've taken on, in case you are having a particular bit of difficulty tackling the rest of the bosses with the debuff you've acquired, but in doing so, it'll revive the boss just associated with that sacrifice. Which causes you to ask yourself the legitimate question of, if you think reviving a boss to take down another one is a worthwhile exchange, and if you think you can take down that boss once more after you've acquired yet more debuffs. In and of itself, I found this system to be interesting to explore, though I'll admit I was also a bit of a dumbass, and for my first run through, I took on every single boss debuff at once, which made things tremendously hard, given that each of these bosses provided some notable and distinct challenges between their encounters, enough so that even when I refought them in the second run of the game, I was finding myself challenged while not debuffed into complete useless paste. Each fight does have a lot to discover in it, whether it's unique mechanics for how to counter the boss's attacks, such as coaxing a massive cleaver-wielding cannibal to barrel roll into mini glaciers, or other odds and ends, such as how not to provoke a twin boss into enraging and summoning their twin far too early because you're doing far too well. Rest in peace, me. Now, I mentioned a bit earlier I ran another playthrough, and the reason for that is the game has multiple endings, one of which leads to a somewhat more challenging and altogether interesting variation on the final boss battle. and which provides the players with a distinct reward of an alternate weapon, one of a few that are accessible in the game for players, and which are provided as alternates that you can replace your current equipment with. Mind you, this is weapons only, not armor. You are stuck with a single bit of armor to use for the entirety of the game, and that's until you debuff yourself out of that. Oh, and there's also a chicken boss, which is a fun optional fight that doesn't require any sacrifices from you and has two very distinct ways that it can pan out, and both reward you with an alternate weapon to toy around with. Suffice to say, my NG Plus run was full of science. And that's hardly where the fooling around has to stop either, given that beating the game also unlocks a set of challenge trials for a player to dive into, ranging from increased move speed but no invincibility frames on dodges to, permadeath mode. Bite me. There's also like a boss rush mode, but I think I spent an hour dying there. Okay, so the music in this game is great. There's some distinctly dramatic tracks amongst them, which absolutely managed to put me on edge as the bosses fought. A few of the alterations that happen with those left motifs actually start to provoke pangs of dread, if only because that change in music also heralded a usually more lethal change in tactics as the boss grew low on health. That part where I said rest in peace me, that applies again. In the visual department, Sinner's pretty damn good looking. While the environments in the game are relatively compact, what is there is fairly distinct looking, and the bosses are likewise memorable in their design. Plus, the cutscenes also have this really distinct and visually pleasing aesthetic to them, and I dug it all the way through. With all this said, it should come as no surprise that I highly enjoyed my time with Sinner. The idea of a player character whose struggle against unnatural forces was gradually weakening him was interesting to me, and I felt the game dealt with it fairly well. I do wish I could have known more about the story and the world at large, but given that the altogether gameplay was satisfying as can be, it wasn't enough a nitpick to distract from my enjoyment. Now, I will admit that this game can be difficult as heck, like, tremendously, but I can honestly say I'd recommend this as a very strong hit, and look forward to more to come from Darkstar. And potentially more from Sinner itself, you know, fingers crossed. Anywho, I'd like to thank you folks for both tuning in, and for those of you who have stuck around till the end. Whether you agree or disagree with my thoughts in this review, I'd love to hear from you folks down in the comments, and for those who are interested in more of my indie reviews or the interviews with the developers of these games, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you get notified when we have a new release. Lastly, and also on the behalf of Lovi, join our Discord. Link in the description and in the banner so you can become a part of our community. It's cozy in there. Anywho, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks. See ya.